Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Department of Economics, Bureau of Economic Research, and Economic Studies Center, Dhaka University, I welcome you all to this extraordinary event today here. And we are very excited to have with us Professor Tirole, the Nobel laureate in economics in 2014, and to give a public lecture here at this the University of Dhaka. I'm also grateful to have eminent economists here, eminent faculties from different departments, and also students, researchers. I know that the capacity of this room is not really great because we wanted to have another room, another auditorium. But because of the convocation program happening in Dhaka University, we could not arrange that. But I'm quite sure the kind of lecture, public lecture, Professor is going to deliver us today, we'll actually forget the kind of environment or the kind of constraints we will be facing in this room. So, I will not really take much time, and I'm also grateful in particular to Professor Rehman because despite his health condition, when he heard that Professor Tirole is coming here and will be giving a lecture on specifically on this particular topic, and he called me and he told me that he wanted to attend this event. I'm sincerely grateful to you, sir. So I'll not take much time. What I'll do, I'll request Professor Atanu Rabbani, and I must say that he's the main organizer of this event, so thanks to him. So to introduce Professor Tirole to us, over to you.
Thank you so much for giving me this very honored task, at the same time quite intimidating. So even if I read the CV that is available from his official site, whole 28 page of it, it will not give a complete picture of the whole life of work of this prolific scholar, partly because the CV hasn't been updated for last 1 year. But even if I glean something out of that CV and just point something out, I think this will give us a sense the great presence that we have here. So I'll try that out in very short 5 minutes. So Professor Tirole is a French citizen. He first studied engineering and mathematics, then decided to switch toward the dark side and decided to become an economist. He later got his PhD in economics from MIT. And after spending a couple of years in France, he came back to MIT and started his career directly as associate professor. And later he became a professor there, but in early 2000 he went back to France and played a very important role in establishing a very major school of economics in Toulouse, in France, where he is still affiliated at the honorary chair and with many other affiliations. He has written, according to that incomplete CV, about 200 papers, and with a little bit of a search on Google Scholar, he is showing no sign of slowing down. He has worked in many different areas, namely game theory, and he has written a textbook of it, on it with Drew Frudenberg. He also worked a lot and has a major contribution in the area of industrial organization, and needless to say, he wrote another textbook on that. He has worked, took those theory and worked a lot in corporate finance, and you can guess, he also has a textbook on that. And there are a few other areas that is mentioned there. For example, he has worked in monetary regulation, procurement. He has worked in the area of monetary policies. He also currently working in the area of behavioral economics. He has a number of other books, and according to the CV, he's also working on a book called Economics. So perhaps it will come out soon, and We have to create another book from it. So, other than that, he has been very much active as a public speaker and public intellectual. With Oliver Glasher, he wrote, I think a couple of years ago, very interesting work on the challenges that 21st century is facing. And he also wrote a book on economics of common good, which kind of highlight what kind of the balance between the market and regulation and state, and how to promote common good, which will benefit all of us. He has received many awards. The one that I want to mention the most is in 2010, he was awarded by the, I believe, Ministry of Culture at France, a prize named after great anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss, and in economics, meaning a prize named after a great anthropologist. I have to mention that. So, but after several years, after that, he also won a very lesser known award, which came from the land of ice and snow, according to Greta Zeppelin, Nobel Prize in Economics in 2014. So it's a pleasure, it's an honor to have you here. I'll spend just last 1 minute on the department, the bureau, and the Economic Studies Center. So Department of Economics has been part of this university from the very beginning, which was established about 101 years ago. It's a very historically rich university, which played a very important role in nation building. At the same time, have been incubated many great scholars. As part of the department, Bureau of Economic Research came into being, I believe, in the early 70s, and it's actually probably the oldest research institute of this university. And also, this program was partly organized by Economic Studies Center, which is a very unique independent student organization, and they do many interesting stuff, some of which we all been part of. I see I have here many of my faculty members, fellows from the department, and I want to thank you. And also some of our alumni, and also many other from the other departments, other faculty. We have our provost are here, and many other from other department. And also it's great to have Professor Raymond Sawan, who was a professor here, and who also played a very important role using economics to almost give a birth to a nation. He and other colleagues, he's definitely one of them. So I won't take much longer, and I'll hand over to Professor Salim to invite.
Thank you very much, Dr. I'm just checking with our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Mr. Professor, whether we'd like to.
I have to leave.
I know, and also I know our Dean of Social Science faculty, because they are extremely busy now with the convocation. So may I request first, Dean of Social Science faculty, Professor Zia, to share a few words.
Thank you, Professor Salim. I'm sure it's not the moment to talk that much from my side, because we were eagerly waiting for Tirole to have surely a great talk from him, and that's why I'm not going to talk that much. And we are very much busy with our convocation. The whole university is in a festive mood, and definitely we are going to attend another program in the convocation center today. So that's why we are not going to talk that much, but I'm sure Professor Tirole has a wonderful contribution in economics, as Atul Rabbani has already mentioned, and some of you are familiar with his work for sure. Since I'm not an economist, for that matter, I'm very much, in a broad sense, I'm a layman, but I'm interested in his work, and that's why I went through some of his works. I'm fascinated by seeing his contribution in not only in economics, but also in sociology, his interest in sociology, psychology, and history, and that really attracted me. It's definitely different kinds of, endeavor in terms of interest, not only just contributing in economics, but integrating many different subjects of social science with economics. So, thank you, Atul Rabbani and Salim Rahan, arranging such a wonderful talk. We don't have that much occasion, that many occasions that we hear talking from this sort of, wonderful and famous economists. I again welcome Tirole from my personal side and from the Department Faculty of Social Sciences. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. May I request our Pro-Vice Chancellor, Professor Mas to come up to give his first classification, please.
Thank you, Dr. Salim Rahan, to organize this important, I would like to say, this knowledge sharing event. When we have with us such a big legendary personality in the area of economics. We came to know the citation of Professor John Tirole. Is it right? Tirole or Tirole? Tirole. The citation we came to know from Professor Atul Rabbani. According to the citation, we have nothing to say. Only we would like to say this is our opportunity to come to know the words of Professor Tirole. And we have our students here, we have the colleagues, and we have the distinguished guests. You know, tomorrow is the 53rd convocation of Dhaka University, and we have the opportunity to invite him to provide an urge to our students, particularly how to shape their life in future. Though he is a professor of economics, we know he also wrote book on philosophy, on the psychology, etc. So we will not confine him only in the area of the economics. He has the versatile knowledge to provide and to talk tomorrow for our students, who will motivate our students. At the same time, Dhaka University almost is 102 years we are passing now, and we will also get some sort of information, some sort of knowledge, how to make and shape this university to lead the nation in future, particularly in the area of socio-economic thought. So I had the intention to be here, but in the morning we had the rehearsal. Again we came to know that Honorable President, maybe he will join virtual tomorrow. So for that reason we had to have another rehearsal like now. For the reason myself and Professor Dia, we have to go to the playground again. But the event which has been arranged by the Department of Economics as well as Bureau of Economic Research and Economics Study Center, in this event, public lecture, Professor John Tirole talk on market and moral. So, of course, from the context of our country, this is very much important. Moral, ethics, these are the very important social asset, and which can correct the market if there is any manipulation or there is the violation of regulation. From that viewpoint, I think our student will be much more benefited going through the lecture of Professor John Tirole. And thanking Professor John Tirole again, because we had this morning, we had breakfast together, we had a lot of chatting, and again he is here before our students. He is another opportunity who are not going to be graduated tomorrow, to be convocated tomorrow. So for you, this is the good opportunity. If you have any question, if you would like to know something more, please ask question. And we have distinguished guests here later on, I think, sometimes later tomorrow, Professor Tirole, he has another invitation in this university at the house of our Vice Chancellor. Then we have, at the time, maybe we can talk further more. Saying these couple of words and wishing the success of this public talk, I would like to conclude here. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you, our Professor Kamal and of course Professor Dia for being with us and also giving their welcome speech.
Sorry, one thing I forgot. This event, it takes a village to do anything, but one person contribution to this arrangement has been immense, and he's also an alumnus of us. So we are very proud of you, Professor Falkvin. So I still vividly remember when I got your WhatsApp message and the possibility of what is happening. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. So now we go straight to our main business. Professor Tirole will be giving this public lecture. The format of today's program will be like this. After he finishes his presentation, we know that we have some distinguished economists and faculties here. We'll try to take their views or some questions from them. And then of course the students who are present here today. I'm requesting Economic Studies Center to assist me in identifying some of the students who would like to pose some questions or comments, and we'll do it in that way. So with this, it's my pleasure to invite Professor Tirole to give his presentation. The password.
Yeah, I'm going to use
Would you like to এটার পেমেন্ট চার্জ ইনচার্জ কে এটা তো অনলাইন
টেকনিক্যাল দিক ওদের
না ওকে দিন তো অনলাইন চাই ওটা কত হয়ে গেল
So yeah.
ওই পাশে অন্ধ করে দিলে আরো বেশি ভালো দেখা যাবে।
না আর অফ করতে হবে তাই না you can go yeah
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you see in the back? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Distinguished guests, the faculty, the students, it's a great honor to be asked to speak in this university, which is of course full of history and full of talent at the same time. And it was a big honor is for tomorrow is a convocation speech, but also in one to the degree that also today I'm very happy. And I want to thank you, by the way, for the very kind words you said about me. On collaboration across fields, so that's something I feel very strongly about. Actually, 11 years ago, in my school, the Toulouse School of Economics, we started an institute for advanced study where we have sociologists, psychologists, anthropologists, philosophers, historians, etc., where we all work together because we have a lot to learn from each other. And I really enjoy actually working with people with different knowledge, and I hope they enjoy working with me and with economists in general. So, today we are going to talk about a topic which is quite difficult. So it's going to be very academic in a sense, research oriented, but at the same time it's also going back to the organization of our society, the broad picture, and the mighty of markets. Now, if you think about what has happened all over the world, basically almost every economy now in the world is a market economy, so counts on capitalism in some form for its growth and well-being. But at the same time, it's fair to say that capitalism is not won the hearts or minds of the people. So we're in a kind of strange situation where all countries have embraced capitalism, but at the same time have second thoughts about capitalism, and we have to understand why. Not only we economists, of course, we economists are often criticized for that, but more broadly, what our societies are about. And we need to think about the moral issue. And anticipating what I'm going to say, I think that economics is a moral and philosophical science, and it should be. It's not always the case, but there is a strong moral and philosophical component on it. Now, is that the case that we have been sacrificing the common good? And there's been lots of criticism of economics and criticisms of the market economy. And we have to understand what has gone on. So there have been several indictments against this, against the market. Basically from the civil society, from religious leaders in most countries, from politicians, also very much from philosophers. There may be some philosophers in the room. And with an objection to markets which are viewed as repugnant sometimes, with different viewpoints. Many famous philosophers, Michael Walzer, Elizabeth Anderson, Michael Sandel, Deborah Stats, have written books which have more or less the same title. It's about, can money buy things? Okay? And they have different viewpoints, but the title is the same and the question they're asking are exactly the same. If you read Michael Sandel, for example, that was a best-selling book, he sold millions of copies. What's wrong with markets? So, just in case in the back you cannot read that, here's a very, very quick summary of one of his ideas is a wide range of goods and services, including babies for adoption, surrogate motherhood, sexuality, drugs, military service, votes, and organs for transplantation, are not to be commoditized through markets, no more than friendships, admission to elite university, or Nobel Prizes are to be bought, or genes or other life forms to be patented. So the general idea is that there are some specific markets that should not exist. And when you listen to this list, you might already feel uncomfortable about thinking about markets for those items. That's one line of attack. There are other lines of attack, which those lines of attacks are broader. It's not specific market like sandal or depressants. It's more more sweeping condemnation of markets. The first argument is very familiar to economists. Actually, we economists work mainly on that. Is the fact that the social value of activities may differ from the private gain. So basically, the incentives of individuals or firms or other players in the economy may not be aligned with the common good. Okay, there are what's called market failures, and we'll come back to that. You know, part of what the government is supposed to do is actually to correct those market failures, to fix those market failures. And in that respect, I want to dispel, at least in my own country, people often view the idea of a liberal economist with the idea of a laissez-faire economist. And this is a huge confusion in my view because most of us are actually not laissez-faire economists. We want the government actually to correct market failures, and much of our research, at least mine, all over my career, has been about antitrust regulation, banking regulation, public utility regulation, privacy regulation, banking regulation, so on. So it's trying to address all the market failures in a sense. So it's not a laissez-faire economy or free market economy. It's different. It's making the economic agents accountable for what they impose on society. Now that's one criticism which is easy to disclose because that's our life, in a sense. That's our bread and butter. We work on things where the social value differs from the private value. Now, something which is harder to dispel is this idea that market frames ethical choices. So this is a more subtle idea which basically said the managers cannot express their social responsibility in the marketplace. So the idea is that managers may not be bad people, they may want actually to achieve the common good. However, they are in the marketplace and they are not free to do whatever they want because competition is putting a lot of constraint on what they are doing. And the typical argument is what's called the replacement logic. So if you have not heard about the replacement logic, it's a very simple thing that I'm sure you have thought about, which is if I don't do it, someone else will do it anyway. So it's a very consequential reasoning saying, okay, I don't like to do that, but given that lots of people can substitute for me, lots of firms can substitute for me, it's not going to change anything if I do it, so I might as well do it. That's a replacement logic. So, for example, you may be a weapons manufacturer, you sell weapons to a dictator, you say, I know it's not nice, I would not want to do that, but anyway, somebody else will sell those weapons, so it might as well be me. It's typical also when people bribe officials. So they say, oh yeah, sure, I don't like to bribe. I say, I know it's immoral, but if I don't bribe, that's not going to change anything because someone will get a contract by bribing the official. The doctors in the US opioid crisis were saying, I know people are consuming too much opioids, but in the end, if I don't give them opioids, they will go and see another doctor and get those opioids. Whitewashing our past shortcomings. An athlete who takes performance-enhancing drugs. As an example, there are many examples, and you might say, even people will say, okay, if I cheat an exam, it's not fair, but if other people cheat, why not me, and so on. It's a kind of logic that is familiar, unfortunately, but it's a fact. Now, if that's the case, you might say, maybe we should not have strong competition. If it's so easy to replace someone by somebody else, then that induces some bad behavior. So that's something we are going to study later on. Why do we care? Well, it's simple why we care. a week ago I was in Brussels, 2 weeks ago I was in Brussels at a conference organized by Margaret Vestager, who is the regulator of competition in Europe. And lots of the discussion was about, well, should we tolerate less competition? So the competition authority will maybe tolerate less competition to get more ethical behavior. In the US, there is the same debate in the Biden administration with what's called hipster antitrust. Regulation, there is also discussion about whether certain sectors should not be supplied by, not for profit and or institutions which do not have a high power incentive schemes for their managers. And in the US in particular, try to avoid private equity groups in hospitals, for example. Because private equity groups, the managers have very high power incentives which may induce them to take ethical shortcuts. Trade liberalization, of course, is something which also might be affected by this kind of reasoning. It strengthens competition. Of course, you in Bangladesh, you will be affected by any change in thinking about trade liberalization. And the overall attitude toward the market economy, because one of the strange things is that, as I said, is that we live in market economies. Almost every country in the world lives in market economy. At the same time, we have mixed feeling about the market economy. So, we have to come to terms with that. So the outline for my talk is, I'll start by talking a little bit about what's more. I don't want to talk very much about it because, I'm not a philosopher either. And, there are lots of different views on morality. And that's, of course, something I cannot cover in 5 minutes. So I will give you a few elements of that. I will give you my view on repugnant market, and I insist it's an economist view. I will discuss then the question I just alluded to, which is, does market frame ethical choices? And if I have time, I will talk about the social responsibility, our social responsibility, and the ESG criteria. If I have time, otherwise we can talk about it during Q&A. Okay. So what is moral? There is a kind of narrow definition of morality, which is often the one of economists. Basically, do no harm. It's linked with externalities. Think of that, just to use language of economics. Basically, you think in terms of externalities, and the idea is to do no harm. Of course, there is always a trade-off between your own well-being and not exerting negative externality onto others. So there, in this narrow conception of morality, it's about pro-social behavior, the avoidance of harm. And it's something which is relatively consensual across countries, across culture, across religion, across whatever. It's something that you get in any society, and almost everyone will think that the crime is not nice, that pollution is not nice, and so on and so forth. And that's the common view in most economic models. It's very universal, stable across time as well. But of course, you're going to tell me it's a restrictive view, but that's where it's going to be more complex, and I don't want to emphasize that too much. One of the things which economists have been working on a huge amount the last 20 years is about the determinants of our morality. And I just want to give you one example. We think more and more about that. I've been working a huge amount on pro-social behavior and what happens to pro-social behavior in various contexts. We have a monthly seminar in Toulouse at the IST where we discuss morality from various points of view. But I just want to give you one example of the kind of research. Actually, that was not done in Toulouse, that was done elsewhere, but the kind of research that is being done in economics, in case you don't know about it. And one of the contributions of economists to the debate on morality is what they call the moral wiggle room. And the basic idea is that even very weak or flimsy excuses can have a big impact on our moral behavior. So it doesn't take very much actually to make us selfish. That's what I mean. It's true that ceteris paribus would like to be generous. And we would like to look generous to others and actually to ourselves. So if you go back to Adam Smith, the inner spectator, we judge ourselves. So we want to convince ourselves we are generous, and we want to convince ourselves, the others, that we are generous. So there is self and social signaling. But all that is affected very badly by even very weak excuses. Okay, so here's the initial experiment, but there have been lots of other experiments confirming that. So a number of you may have heard about the dictator game. So the dictator game, it's also called the helping game, is basically a situation where you have a trade-off between doing good to yourself and doing good for someone else. So it's a very basic ethical dilemma. Okay, do I behave selfishly, or do I take into account the welfare of the other person? So a typical experiment like this would be like this. So you're in front of a computer, and you have to choose between two choices, A and B. So A is a selfish option. So those are US experiments. So if I choose A, I get $6 for myself. And then there's somebody else in another room who will get $1. Okay? That's a selfish option because I get 6 for myself. If I choose B, in the right it's the dictator, the one who chooses. If I choose B, I get 5 for myself and I get 5 for the other person. So there's a sacrifice. I'm losing $1 by actually choosing B, but I'm being nice. I'm being pro-social. Okay? So a typical experiment that depends on the environment, the culture, who is on the other side. Is the person on the outside, is he or she an economist, or is he a lawyer, or whatever? You might that changes a bit, or if it's a foreigner, or someone from your university. I mean, you can imagine lots of situations, but by and large, people are willing to sacrifice a little bit of their money in order to be nice. And by the way, this is pure self-signaling because the behavior is observed only by oneself. You click on a computer, and it's organized in such a way that you are the only one who knows actually what you have chosen. So the entire signaling is really self-signaling, where you're trying to prove to yourself that you're a nice person. So in a typical experiment, maybe 3/4 would choose B. So we would choose to be generous. It would be one off, but at least you have a non-negligible fraction of people who are going to choose something which is generous and not selfish, homo economicus. Okay? So that's it. There have been thousands of experiments like this done all over the world. Now, what's interesting about the Dana, Weber, and Vaughan paper is that they modify it. So now they assume there are 2 states of nature, state of nature 1 and state of nature 2, and they are equally likely. But once a state of, so you think about tossing a coin, and that would be state of nature 1 or state of nature 2. Now, in state of nature 1, you get exactly the same trade-off as before. So if you take the selfish action A, you get 6, and the other person gets 1. If you choose B, you both get 5. Okay? Now, what's interesting is that they add state of nature 2. So in state of nature 2, choosing A is a no-brainer. Because when you choose A, you get 6, the other person gets 5. If you choose B, you get 5, and the other person gets 1. So it's a total no-brainer in that state of nature. You should basically choose A, right? Because it's good for you and it's good for the other person. Okay? Now, where it gets interesting is they ask people, okay, you can click on the computer and you can know for free immediately what the state of nature is. So you can choose to know the state of nature, so you can know whether you're on the left or on the right of the screen. Now, let's take a poll here. How many people believe that the subject is going to want to know the state of nature? So, nobody wants to raise the hand for raising? Okay. How many believe that they won't want to know the state of nature? You're not allowed to answer. Someone wants to explain the bet or the reasoning? Okay. So we know that as a decision maker, in general, having more information is good because you can take more informed decisions. So the standard notion in economics is that if you have more information, that's good for you. In game theory, it's a bit different, but when you're playing games with others, that's different. But if you are just by yourself, having more information allows you to take a decision which is a better decision. But here it turns out that actually most people say, I don't want to learn the state of nature. I just don't want to learn the state of nature. Surprising, right? It's free. You can learn it immediately. So, what do they choose? Any guess on the choose? So, I say, I don't want to learn the state of nature. What am I going to choose? Sorry? A, that's right. You're going to choose A. And it is a very, very flimsy excuse. Because you can say I choose A, and I may not have hurt the other person, which is correct. Which is correct, because when you choose A and you're in state of nature 2, you're actually benefiting the other person. And what happens is that people, when you compute things, actually behave much less pro-socially than in the previous experiment because they don't want to know. And yes, they have this excuse that they may not hurt the other person. It's a very flimsy excuse because, you know, if you are really pro-social generous, you will want to know the state of nature. In the state of nature 1, you would choose A. You should B. I'm sorry. In state of nature 1, you would choose B. In state of nature 2, you would choose A. So if you are really generous, you will want to know the state of nature because you will not be doing the same thing in both states of nature. And you know, there have been experiments like this. So for example, putting into a real world context, nobody likes to fire an employee, for example. So, you know, people like to delegate this decision to somewhere else. And there are fascinating experiments on basically people delegating a tough decision to somebody else who has built a reputation for actually taking those tough decisions. If you think about you know, changing sidewalk because you don't want to see the beggar, because you know that if you see the beggar, you will feel compelled to give to the beggar. So you might change the street or the sidewalk to avoid that. The firing squad, I don't know here in Bangladesh, but the firing squad, I guess we don't have anymore, but the firing squad, historically you always have someone with a blank bullet, right? So the excuse is, of course, you may not have killed the person, but there's another excuse is that actually that other person would have been killed anyway. But yeah, it's interesting how those very feeble excuses actually can have such a powerful impact on our pro-social behavior. Now, this is still pro-social behavior. Even so, the variants are kind of interesting. Okay. Now, there's a broader notion of moral, of course, and you know, we could talk for hours about that. Just to give you an example, going beyond no harm, for example, but something that violates conventions or taboos, generates disgust, or feeling of disrespect, and so on, is something which number of people think that it's not such a good thing to do. Also, there it's much more dependent on the time, on this, on the period. It depends also on the country, on the culture. The key words here might be duty, authority, loyalty to the in-group, the religion, the family, the workplace, the country, the platoon, and so on. And it's much more unstable. So you may know that in many religions, actually, life insurance was sort of as being immoral. Now every French person has a life insurance now, but it was sort of as being immoral in many religions and many centuries. Gay marriage was supposed to be very immoral in many countries and many religions until recently. And things change over time, and that raises a question in general about, and this I'm not going to answer, what is meant by harm, okay? So, if I punch Atonu, then of course I'm hurting him, that's pretty clear, right? That's not nice. But, if I say something that, Atonu would disagree with, is that harm? Am I inflicting harm to Atonu because I'm actually saying something he doesn't like? It's very difficult actually to know where you put the dividing line. You have to show respect. I think most of us would agree that you have to show respect to others. But where does it stop? Where does it stop? And it's a very difficult question. You can extend the notion to mental harm. So if we are in a university, and the wonderful thing about the university is that you can engage in discussion about many things with people who don't think like you, because talking to people who don't think like you is very enriching. It's actually very good for thinking about the issues. And the university has this big advantage is that you can actually discuss freely with people who disagree with you. And that's pretty unique environment for that. And that's something that, if you start saying, well, but if you disagree with me, then you're imposing mental harm on me, then that's defeats the purpose somehow. And so there is this book by a philosopher named Jonathan Haidt, who tried to understand actually going beyond the standard notion of morality is a narrow notion that you should not exert negative externalities. The pro-sociality notion. Why is that actually in almost every society you also have a wider notion, and you go beyond the standard notion. So just to warn you that actually it's a more complex notion than what I'm going to work with from now on. So, okay. I think it's fair to say that we economists have this worldview that markets and incentives are key. Even so, we spend our entire life to criticize them. So, there's this view that societies are organized around market incentives because they are efficient. They allow you to grow, they allow you to be more prosperous, have access to many things that you didn't have access to. And at the same time, we also realize the limits of that, which is all the market failures, and there are many of those. Before I talk about market is a specific incentive, by the way. So just about incentives themselves, it's not true that economists have always said give maximal incentive. Actually, much of the work which has been done in the last 40 years was trying to understand when sometimes you should not give incentives which are too strong. So a low power incentive scheme. And there are many reasons for that. So for example, when you cannot measure performance very well, the special case of that is when you have a team production, when there's capture or collusion with monitor, when it's a repeated game, when there is multitasking. So don't try to give strong incentive on one task when the person is also doing another task, because that might actually divert attention away from the other task. Asymmetric information. I mean, there are many reasons for why very, very strong incentive may backfire. And actually, it's even worse than that, because they can be even crowding out. So the incentive may actually reduce performance, reduce the supply which suffers. So 20 years ago, Roland Benabo and I wrote 2 papers describing 2 mechanisms for why you could have crowding out of intrinsic motivation by incentives. One was based on the fact that incentives may convey information about the task of the person. So for example, if I give you an incentive that may in some circumstances say that I don't trust you, that may reduce your intrinsic motivation. And the second one is much more familiar actually from psychology, which is the idea that if you give money to perform if you give incentive actually to perform a task, then that shed a doubt about why the person performed the task. So the standard example, there are some experiments about that, is in many countries, people who give their blood are not paid. When you give your blood, it's free. And there are some countries where you are being paid when you give your blood. And some people say, well, but if you pay people, at least you don't pay enough. If you pay people for giving their blood, then they may be less generous actually, because people wonder whether they do it for the money or they do it because they are good people. And there is this, in economics we call that a signal extraction issue. You no longer know whether the person is giving the blood because the person is greedy, because it's being paid, or because that person is generous. And same thing there. The general view of economists about markets is that markets are wonderful because they are very efficient. At the same time, they fail all the time. And if they are properly regulated, then they're a good way of organizing the economy. But you have to regulate, and you need to have a strong state to do that. So psychologists and sociologists will actually be less thrilled in general about material incentives for reasons that I've mentioned. The legal scholars have a slightly different point of view. They often talk about expressive law. So the idea is that, a legal system is an incentive scheme. If you go to jail, of course, that's an incentive not to commit certain behaviors. But it's more than an incentive scheme. So their view, the legal scholars, their view is that it also reflects and conveys a society's value. And therefore, there's more than just a system of incentive and sanctions. And then I talk about the philosopher. So the question is economics a moral and philosophical science? So let me just say that a little bit of advertising here for economics. Yeah. Thank you. So the idea is that actually much of the criticism about repugnant market, in a sense, is very straight economics. There's nothing new there. I will go beyond this observation, but in a sense, that's something that economists have already talked about, not necessarily for the particular application, but those are fairly standard things. So we economists talk a lot about externalities, for example. The standard one is, of course, emitting greenhouse gases. That is typical externality that has to be corrected. but you can apply that to a repugnant market as well. So if you think, for example, about the fact that, think about the market for babies for adoption, which is very repugnant sort, right? We would not like that. But one way you might say, okay, there's a buyer, there's a seller, they agree, everything is fine. No, everything is not fine, because of course the main person in the contract is actually the baby, and there is no reason why that trade actually will guarantee a good future for the baby. Internalities, if you don't know the word, is basically an externality on yourself. So that's when you don't stand for the best of your interest, and therefore you might do something which is wrong not for the others, but is wrong for yourself. Usually because you are impulsive. Okay, so you put too much weight on the present. So typical thing is taking drugs or drinking too much or not working hard enough, watching TV instead of preparing doing your homework. All kinds of things, and not saving enough for the future. Putting a lot of weight on the present compared to the future. But if you think about it, that may apply to certain things. So, for example, one of the shocking things about kidney cells, for example, is that in the countries where it exists, of course, very destitute, very poor people who actually sell their kidney. And you might say that might be a way for them to actually make money, they badly need money, but at the same time, they might actually take a decision that they might regret later on, because they need the money now, and later on they will say, why did I sell my kidney for? Because it's not innocuous for so little. Same thing with slavery. Not involuntary slavery. Everybody will say involuntary slavery, of course, is crazy. Again, it's a trade which is missing the main party, which is the slave, right? So that's immoral. But what about voluntary slavery? So voluntary slavery is that you agree yourself, thinking deep enough about it, to sell your labor for the rest of your life. It's not someone who takes you and sell your labor, but it's you yourself who decide to sell your labor. And you might say, well, what's wrong with that? After all, the two parties agree to that trade, and therefore that should be fine. But you might say, there might be an internality here because the person doesn't quite realize what it's going to imply for the future and puts too much weight on the current amount of money which that person is going to get now. Something, coming back to externality, there's something very interesting about externality, which is not a standard economic view of externalities, but it's not that far from it, which is called image externality. So that the idea is that, when you behave in a certain way, it's going to, have implication for people in your category, in your group. So there's an externality in terms of image. So it's well known in business. So, if a garment, ready-made garment factory abuses, not treating the workers well, not respecting the environmental norms, it's going to hurt itself, but especially it's going to hurt all the other garment factories, even if those behave better than that particular one, because there is some kind of collective reputation. But you might say, the same thing is that, for example, prostitution, one of the issues is that it sheds bad light on the image of the categories of people who prostitute themselves. So it's not only the prostitute, but it's also the people, the women and others who prostitute themselves. So there is this bizarre thing which has made the Supreme Court in France 30 years ago about dwarf tossing. So it's really a crazy practice in which you may have seen some movies about that, where a person of small height is being thrown, and the game is really to throw that small person as far as possible. Now it's not dangerous because the person is protected, but I'm not going to explain why people are interested in that. I just don't understand. But The fact is, some people are interested in that, and those small people, that's their way of making money. That's their living. And actually, in the French case, the person who sued the prohibition was actually the small person who was being tossed. And the French Supreme Court really said, no, that's not right. I agree it's a contract between two parties. I agree that they are sold about this thing. It's not an issue that there was no duress or anything like that. But the Supreme Court said, no, but it's an image externality. It's something that can be done. Asymmetric information. Okay? If I pay you to be my friend, how would I know you are my friend? Right? And there's no way. If I pay you, I will never know that you're my friend. If you pay, if you pay to a university to get your diploma, even so you got failing grades. If the university does that, what's the value of your diploma? Zero, right? So, I should have said that the day before convocation. I know the prestige of this university, of course, so that's not an issue, but you understand, you understand these are standard economic issues, basically. Those are very, very standard economic issues. Okay. The other thing I think I feel very strongly about is about indignation. We all feel indignant when there's something we don't like. And probably that's a good thing, but it's a good thing as a warning signal that something might be wrong. I don't like people who are just indignant, because usually it's an excuse for not thinking. If I feel I really dislike something, I try actually to think about why I don't like it. Just to try to understand. And for public policy, it's also useful because that way you can think about how you can arrange, regulate that behavior. Because those behaviors exist. All those markets, whether we like them or not, they do exist. The market for dwarf tossing, for prostitution, for organ sales, and I could go on and on. They exist because there is a supply and there is a demand. You cannot just assume the supply and demand away. They do exist. So if you want to regulate them, you have to understand them very deeply. So I'm not saying this is wrong to be indignant. Actually, I think it's useful and good. You need to feel emotional about something, but being emotional is not reasoning. It's a warning signal. So, when for a long time in the West, it was very immoral for people from different races to marry. Marriage between gays, for example, was sort of as being immoral. But you could have asked, who is hurt? Where is the harm? That's the kind of thing that, we have to think, because at some point we have to make the debate more rational. And, it's not just debate with emotions. Emotions, they are very useful in the first step, they can be dangerous in the second step, because people have used that to repress all kinds of minorities, for example. So I feel very strongly about that, but we could have a discussion. It's a complicated topic. Okay, so I don't know how long I can speak, but I'm moving on to a topic I've been working on with a colleague and friend of mine, Matthias de Watripon, who is at the Free University in Brussels. And that's really very closely related to the topic of today. Sorry, I could talk for hours and hours, but you'll be tired, especially with those who stand. And I appreciate you being here. So, nagging question, does the market weaken our moral compass? Okay, so I already mentioned the replacement of excuse. If I don't do it, someone else will, in any case. And the idea of the paper with Matthias de Watripon is to try to think about when it's going to be the case. and when competition might actually be bad for social welfare. So here is a more technical part, and not really there won't be much maths, but basically trying to think about this issue. So what we do is to look at an oligopoly. So those of you who are economists and have done industrial organization, you know that you can describe industries by the number of firms, how substitute their products are, and so on, basically to look at the intensity of competition among those firms. So think about an oligopoly with n firms, and those firms compete for the business of customers. Customers are one of the stakeholders, but there are also other stakeholders, including input suppliers. So the workers are supplying an input into the production process, and so do investors, debt holders and shareholders. They are of course supplying an input to the firms. So in red I've put here the stakeholders. And then those firms will be run by managers. The managers are going to decide on two things. The first thing is a price, so they compete in the marketplace through how much they charge to the consumer. In most markets, not in all markets, of course, because in some markets the price is regulated. So think about taxis in most cities in the world, the price is regulated. In a number of healthcare systems, doctors' price is regulated. It's decided by regulation. In franchising environment, often the franchisees don't have a choice on the price. They have to charge a price which is imposed by the manufacturer. That's one dimension. So a price maybe, if it's not regulated, and also the morality of the action. So you choose, and I will come back to these examples, you choose how moral your production is. Very simple framework. And what's going to be very, very important for what I'm going to say is what does an ethical choice do in order to demand? So is it going to increase or decrease demand? So in the example I gave you earlier, okay, let me go back. In the example I gave you earlier, like selling weapons to a dictator. So if you behave immorally, you get bigger market share. Basically bribes, the same thing. If you bribe the official, you're more likely to get the contract. If an athlete takes a performance enhancing drug, this athlete is more likely to actually to win the race, and so on. So those are cases in which when you behave immorally, your market share of whatever market you have in mind actually increases. Okay, that's one environment. There are also environments in which when you behave morally, that's the reverse. When you behave morally, your market share increases. So if you go back to this diagram, you may have socially responsible workers and socially responsible investors, and there they will value the firm which behaves morally. So they will be more likely to work for firms which has a good reputation for ethical behavior. And same thing, the investors will be more willing to give their money to the firms which behave socially responsibly. Okay? So what I'm saying, and sometimes when you don't even observe the moral behavior, that means that demand doesn't change so much with some caveat, doesn't change so much with the moral behavior. Okay? So that's a framework. So I just repeating on that slide what I just told you. There are consumers which are called irresponsible, where being unethical increases demand. So in the paper, paper is on my website, by the way. There are three reasons for that: externalities, internalities. There are also shrouded attributes, which give rise possibly to unethical behavior or increasing demand. Then responsible consumer, that means that if you are ethical, then you increase your demand. For example, there is a demand for fair trade products. That's important. And then you have neutral consumers. Okay, so let me start with a very simple result. It's kind of strange. Actually, we are surprised by this result. So the question we are asking is very simple. Does an increase in competition erode moral behavior? So the markets become more and more competitive. Can become more and more competitive because you have more and more firms that produce substitutes, because there is antitrust enforcement. I mean, there are many reasons for why the market might become more competitive. And so we change, in a sense, the elasticity of demand for individual firms. And what we show is that in case prices are flexible, so basically you can change your price, then an increase in competitive pressure doesn't have any impact on equilibrium behavior. So let's say, what? But let me try to give you some intuition for this idea that actually, that really means that competition and the marketplace are not going to make people behave better, they're not going to make people behave worse. It's kind of neutral, which in a sense we have always assumed in economics, or also we haven't really incorporated physical behavior into the modeling. So if you think about, let's go back to the example I gave you, which is, if you think that unethical behavior is going to boost demand, your own demand, so if you behave immorally, that's going to increase your demand. Then, if you have a very competitive market, that means the elasticity of demand is very high. So if you behave unethically, you are going to boost your market share a lot. Okay, so that's basically a bit like the replacement logic. You benefit from behaving immorally. But there is a second effect which goes exactly in the opposite direction, which is that if you have a competitive market, you also have a lower markup. You have to lower your price in order to get demand. So if you have a very competitive market, you have low price cost margin. Okay? But that means that an additional sale is less profitable than when you have high markup. And if you think about managers basically trading off two things, the profit and whatever internalization of social welfare there is, then if you make less profit by behaving immorally, you're going to behave more morally, and that's going to offset the previous effect. So it's a rough intuition for this result, which basically says markets are kind of neutral in a sense. They are not good, they are not bad in terms of morality. They reduce the stakes and therefore reduce more moral behavior, but at the same time, if you have unethical demand, unethical behavior boosting demand, they also raise your incentive to behave in an immoral way. Okay. So what we do then is to basically extend the analysis. What happens when prices are not flexible? Maybe they are regulated. So we show then that there is an effect of the market. More competition is going to be bad if you have a responsible consumer, and it's going to be good if you have responsible consumers. Okay. So if you have a responsible consumer, that's the conventional wisdom I gave you earlier, and you have no reduced markup effect, because competition is not going to reduce the market because prices are fixed. But if you have responsible consumers, then actually having more competition is good for morality. People want fair trade coffee, and if you have more competition, that means by basically being fair to your suppliers, it's going to attract more people. So, in that case, competition is good. So, the overall picture, it's a very testable theory because can look at the specific environment and you know which way it's going to go. But the basic point is that you know, you cannot just say from the outside, not knowing more detail, whether competition is going to hurt or boost ethical behavior. Okay? And there is much more in the paper I'm not going to cover. Now there is another topic I'm not going to cover because I'm already pretty late. And I would like to have a discussion with you, but there is social responsibility and ESG criteria. So what should we be talking about? And you know, basically I would like to stop here. And basically, it was an introduction to a number of topics. We can discuss that more, but I would like to thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Tirole. I know that it was such a rich presentation on a topic which is it was very theoretical, and there are some very clear messages too, which we can link to some very practical life experiences, some of the practical issues. I'm quite sure that today we have some distinguished economists here, faculties, and students as well. We would like to pose some questions or comments on some of the arguments put forward by Professor Tirole. So I would request Professor Evanson, he can come in at any time, whenever he wants to.
No,
So,
here others.
so you'd like to speak
No,
now?
no, I would very much like to hear
Okay.
others.
Okay, so, okay. Oh, yes.
Presentation. Thanks.
Who wants to go first?
If anyone doesn't,
Okay, please.
Thank you, Professor Tirole. It has been wonderful.
If you could very briefly introduce yourself. Yeah.
Sorry. I'm Rashid Kutamir. I work for the University of Dhaka in the Department of Development Studies. It was wonderful to have you when we were at master students to have this theory of industrial organization, which was kind of a new thing for us. So it's good to see you in person. I was wondering on two issues. There is a tendency, and this is being the 300 years of birth of Adam Smith. So the economists there is a inherent trend to say good thing about everything. Like Adam Smith calling the book as an inquiry into wealth of nation or theory of moral sentiment. And you are following the same trend saying that economics for common good. And then there are theories about a theory of justice and many things. So that's on the other side of the spectrum. Some people are not interested in really qualifying things, like say Karl Marx, who would call capital, wouldn't really qualify anything. And then if you go on a second part, then you see that most of it, what you were talking, remain undefined, say profit, or in your case harm. And then it always provides certain degree of controversy, but it stops somewhere. So how do you see that what really matters remains residual? So that's one question. Secondly, I saw that in your economics for common good, you tried to explain homosocial and procrastinate and all those in a deeper sense, and not to really go that further to say about that homosociality. So how do you see this from a very concrete thing? Like now we are having COP27, right? And every day energy companies are minting $1 billion per day, and that estimates come from World Bank, right? And then economists like Nicholas Stern or Sir Partho is talking about something where they are trying to say that nature is an asset class. So, but how do and it's good that in your book you call that we are a decimal scientist while the physicians are caring persons, right? So how do you relocate ourselves? And given that there are always challenges, particularly in French tradition, and the recent, not that recent, the students are really talking about we need a concrete, radical change of the economics course, the way we taught. So how do you respond to this? Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Would you like to respond now? Or
It's up to you. I mean,
It's okay. Yes, you can go.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your questions. Interesting question. Let me just say something about, I mean, you know it, but just for the audience, what we economists do, of course, is we make strong assumptions, because it's like an engineer somehow. You know, you have to isolate some stuff that we can understand and we can work with. And there is always the issue about how seriously you take the conclusion. So, for one thing, we go back and forth, of course, more and more. More and more we're going back and forth between the theory and the empirical work, and you see all those collaborations developing. And I think that's very important, because I'm mainly a theorist, I also do some empirical work, but always with empiricists, because I'm not good enough an empiricist to do the work myself, but I try to do that as well. And there are limitations. We try to isolate what we think is important, but we may be missing lots of stuff. And there are examples in the past where economists have missed important stuff. That's clear. And I think that's the best we have, in a sense, this back and forth between theory and empirical work to validate theories. And then the policy debate and this interaction that exists, because in my own research I actually got a number of research topics in a weird way, which is just talking to practitioners who are not economists, and just say, oh yeah, there's obvious thing. I'm sure you are the king of industrial organization, and I'm sure you know the answer. And many times I said, I don't know the answer at all. And you can use that as an opportunity for research if you don't understand something. And, I think economics is a science. It's not an exact science, far from it. And we have our flaws. And there is always a difficult issue, which is when you talk about policy. And that's something I've done more and more the last 8 years, because before I was doing a very involved in policy, but with experts. But when you talk beyond experts to a wide audience, not to this group, but to a wide audience, and you're on TV, and how far do you go? You believe something, but you can be wrong. Now, not saying anything is not a solution, because you may actually know more than the person you're talking to. But at the same time, you run a risk of saying, I'm the economist. The worst thing is to say, I'm Nobel Prize laureate. That's the worst possible thing, and you should believe me, this is the truth. That's a difficult stance. Now, you mentioned COP27. I understand this is a very awful issue, and especially for you in Bangladesh. And that's something I could talk about for hours and hours and hours. Actually, Nick Stern is an old friend, and he was on a commission that Atonu mentioned, the commission for President Macron, but it was an international commission, and most of the people actually are not French. And it was more for Europe, I would say, when it's available on the web if you're interested. But we have to get our act together, and in my view, it's very straight economics. It's an externality. It's an externality on everybody else. Not uniform, of course, because there are some who are going to suffer more than others from climate change. But it's an externality, and there are economic instruments to treat this externality. For 30 years, I've been trying to convince people like ministers actually to change their behavior. To no avail. I mean, I failed miserably, I should say, in trying to change people's mind. We have to keep fighting. My colleague and I will keep fighting to try to get people to have reason. I mean, not only in developed countries who are responsible for this, but also for emerging countries, because I think that what I hear sometimes from emerging countries is also very frightening. If sure, I mean, there's a big debt of the developed countries, but most of the pollution now is going to come from emerging countries, which is normal because they want to finance their development, and I fully agree with that. But if there is no effort, if all the efforts come only from the developed countries, this planet will disappear. So we need to really make sure that we have the efficient instrument and we have fairness at the same time. And there are solutions, but the politicians don't want to hear those solutions. And that's in almost every country in the world, I would say. And that's, I think it's terrible. I don't know what it's going to take to actually convince people to actually become reasonable. So I don't know, I mean, we can talk for hours about that because I feel very strongly about that. The concrete change in our view. Yesterday I was asked a question about, isn't that all the fault of capitalism? And if you say it's the fault of laissez-faire, I'll sign immediately. I'll be happy with that. But again, we need markets. Every other economy which doesn't use markets has kind of failed at some point, which doesn't mean that the state has nothing to do. As I said, the state has a very, very important role to play in the economy. It's a complement to markets. It's not a substitute, it's a complement to markets. And markets cannot function well if you don't have a strong state. But in the case of climate change, we have weak states, very weak states actually. So I would be a defender of capitalism actually, but of course not capitalism the way we see it. Real capitalism which takes care of all the market failures, including inequality, by the way. I view inequality as a market failure because if you refer yourself behind the veil of ignorance, you ask yourself, what kind of society would I like to live in? Probably you would like to have much less inequality than there is now. And it's not the role of market to deliver equality, it's the role of the state actually to deliver equality. Equality of chances, education, equality, not equality, you don't want equality of revenue and wealth, but less inequality. That's the role of the state. And that's very important. So yeah, I think that's
Thank you very much, Remy. We'll come to you also, but before the Professor. But students would like to ask questions, please. I'll come to you next time. So first, Professor Mustafa Rahman, then Dr. Shakil, if I'm not wrong, and then I'll come to you. Yes.
Thank you, Professor Tirole. My name is Mustafa Rahman. I used to teach in Dhaka University. Now I am with Center for Policy Dialogue, a civil society think tank, of which Professor Redman Sowan is the founding chairman. Thank you. I was trying to listen to you with the Bangladeshi mindset and trying to contextualize what you are saying. Now, for example, you have mentioned about the responsible consumers and also being ethical could be a market selling incentive. And you have mentioned also fair trade products. Now, what we see is that you have mentioned just now about states, but there are intermediaries in markets. For example, Bangladesh is ready with garments. We are the second largest exporter in the global market. So you have major buying, entities, which are the intermediaries. Now, once we go for example, for ethical selling or environmentally friendly goods, and Bangladesh has world's 5 of the 10 most the platinum factories in our country. The entrepreneurs should complain that we are investing in environment-friendly production, but we are not getting the premiums that we were expecting. So there is a major failure in the global trading system. So your insights on that. And the second is, for example, the intellectual property rights issues, which are also constraining the global flow of technology and technology transfer. Bangladesh should be graduating in 2026 from the NDC group, and the TRIPS flexibilities for pharmaceuticals will not be there. So the studies show that the price of insulin could go up by 12 times. So, so I'd like to hear your insights with regards to how do we address this type of issues which are associated with morals and markets. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. And the first about the collective reputation, because that's really what is at stake. I mentioned earlier the possibility of one firm damaging the reputation of other firms because this collective reputation is made in Bangladesh, right? So you could have lots of firms putting some effort in treating their workers better and protecting the environment. If you have a few bad firms, the reputation will be solid elsewhere in the world. And when you say we don't gain market share by doing that, I would say just think about the counterfactual. So nowadays, in Europe and the US, the buyers of goods and services and also the investors, the socially responsible investors, they put more and more emphasis on good behavior. It's not enough, but it's a growing now. So that means that Bangladesh if Bangladesh hadn't won those prices, Bangladesh would be out of the market now. If the memories in Europe might be the memory of the catastrophe 9 years ago. Those are the kind of things which actually kills the industry, and it's very important. So it's very important that you have some coordination at the country level, so that you don't get the bad firms actually spoiling the market for the good firms. And having some kind of regulation is actually useful for that, to avoid this very bad externality. And the second point I want to make is that now, and we're going to go back to the graduation, but the fact that when sorry, I'm just loss of flow. So the graduation in 2026 is going to impose more conditions. And not only the conditions you have in mind, so you have in mind the TRIPS agreement, you have the concessional loans, the grants, Gavi, and all those things that you're not going to have full access to anymore, which is important. But also, once you want to sign new agreements with the Europeans, for example, they would ask you, how do you treat the workers? How do you protect the environment? And at that point of time, it would be very useful to have those platinum things, because you can show them, look, this is not the reputation we have because of the disaster in 2013. We have made progress, and that's very important. The more you're going to graduate, the more the customers are going to be wanting to see what's behind. And that's unavoidable. So let me say a few things about graduation, not tomorrow's graduation, but the 2026 graduation. The 2026 graduation. It's both a wonderful accomplishment if you think about it. It's incredible what has been done in the last 40 years in Bangladesh. It has a cost because there are all those new constraints. And my view is that it's normal in the sense that when a country's GDP grows, that this country has more responsibility, and that's, I think, totally normal. The bizarre thing is it's a bit discontinuous, right? You wonder why all at once you are rich. It's strange, right? I mean, it's not. It's encouraging, but at the same time, that means that there will be a couple of years which are going to be difficult. Not only because you have lost reserve and so on and so forth, but also because you are graduating, and that will impose big challenge, but at the same time, this challenge you are going to face. You're going to face if you want to grow into, which I hope you will, into a middle-income country, and you have the potential for that. There's no reason. I mean, you have shown through a series of policies that you could actually do it. Now, it's not enough, but you have to improve all kinds of things, like governance and administration and all those things. And I don't want to be here trying to lecture you. That would be terrible. But I would be rather optimistic with a couple of years, which are going to be rough, I think. There will be some difficult years, but by and large, on track. Any other? Oh yeah, on the IPR issue on the property rights. Yes, again, there's a bit too much discontinuity in there, and that's an issue. The price of medicine actually is not always due to patents. So patents may be bad, but at the same time, I guess you have in mind new forms of insulin, not insulin itself, which has been off patent for a long time, but the new forms of insulins. But often it's not only the patent, it's know-how how to do it, the supply of stuff, and all kinds of things. The problem with LDCs, I don't know about Bangladesh, actually Bangladesh has a pharmaceutical industry which is pretty well developed, but often it's not only the patents. I'm not an expert, but some colleagues of mine have been studying the role of patents in the access to medicine for LDCs. And I was a bit surprised. It's not just patents, much more than patents. And of course there's the delivery process, which is added to that. So, some of the stuff you need heavy supervision by the doctors, and if you don't have the process to actually carry the vaccine, brainwashed by COVID, but all kinds of medicines. It's not only what I'm saying. It's an infrastructure. It's a know-how to fabricate things and many other things beside patents. So, but still, I take your point, which is the transition is too brutal somehow.
Thank you very much. So I'll go to Dr. Shakil and of course Dr. Satya Jalil. Students, I haven't seen any hands. Okay, I'll come to you then. Okay. First, Dr.
And good evening to everyone else. I'm Dr. Shakil and I'm working for Bracken University Department of Economics. So, theoretical question to you. So whenever you say about that dictator game, so what I understand after talking to Professor Rubenstein, it's kind of like a jungle economy where envy is there. So according to the first fundamental theorem of welfare economics, the fairness to me is I get everything and you get nothing. So in general, let's say in second fundamental theorem, yes, reallocation can be done. So the question is that can we go forward for certain kind of moral reallocation or redistribution of moral wealth? Is it possible that can solve the market failure? Because whenever you say, yes, whenever market failure is there and free market does not work, I'm pretty sure Vernon will not be happy with your answer. I'm talking about Vernon today. But yes, how can that be done? What do you think? Thank you.
Just on Adam Smith, he was an advocate of free markets, but not completely free. I mean, he realized pretty well that some markets, like education, will not just come by themselves and could be very inefficient, and the state has to change. I mean, you mentioned earlier the Theory of Moral Sentiments, which is a wonderful book, and it's so people say it's Adam Smith is a free trader. That's not correct actually. He went way beyond that. Now, market economy again, it's about efficiency. It's not about distribution of income. I mean, it doesn't mean that every person one person should take it all. No, not at all. But still, there is no reason why we should have a decent distribution of income from market economy. Even if you apply antitrust, for example, one of the issues we are working on nowadays is big tech company in the US, which makes lots of money now. Is that because they're not regulated enough? So we try to think about clever or smart regulations to see. But even after all, maybe after all, Steve Jobs or Bill Gates or many others have done good for society. But there's no reason why they should get. Or Elon Musk, actually, I think Elon Musk, there are two people in Elon Musk. So he's the entrepreneur, who is a very interesting person, and then there's a person who's a bit stranger. But anyway, so Elon Musk has done very important stuff. Now, should he get hundreds of billions of dollars? I'm sure if we had told him when he started that he would get $10 million, he would have said, I would have signed up immediately for that. He said, well, what would I do with that money? Of course, with $44 billion, you can buy Twitter, but so what? And I think it's dangerous when big businesses start owning media, and there are media now, big player of the media market, Google and Facebook and so on. They're delivering your news nowadays, not to mention Twitter. That, by and large, haven't abused yet, but the potential for abuse is there. And that's not new. I mean, in many countries, the rich businessmen have bought a newspaper at a time. Now it's basically tech. So dictator game is really about trying to understand our deep self. We're trying to understand who we are. It's a fine thing to say, to think one is generous, but then what the more wiggle room illustration experiment shows, has shown repeatedly, is that we may not be as generous as we try to pretend. And that's very important to understand, because when I go back, maybe we can discuss briefly social responsibility, which is we have to be very careful about avoiding greenwashing. Most people want to look good. I don't know of any person who wants to look bad. Even the worst possible persons on earth, they still try to prove they are moral people. And that's true. I mean, even the worst, most awful people, they try to think of themselves as being moral. And at some point you have to think, well, we have to be clear about what we mean. And one of the things I'm afraid of is that I see a fair amount of greenwashing out there. People pretending to be green but not being green, and actually they don't even look at what they do. They don't want to know whether there's any impact on society. So I could give you lots of examples of things that look green but are not green. And this is something which we have to ask ourselves, because in the end it's us, right? How do we behave, and what drives our behavior?
So do you suggest on that part, like, okay, the redistribution of moral is not possible, mostly because we are getting less generous, as you say, through repeated.
I'm saying, I don't think social responsibility of investors, of workers, of consumers, I think it's nice, but it's not going to suffice. It's definitely not sufficient. If the state doesn't take its responsibility in all those domains, that's no good.
That's the problem with the institution.
Yeah, so that's a big issue.
Thank you. Dr. Sadhajit, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Tirole, for coming and giving us this very beautiful presentation. Before I get into the topic you discussed about, two demands on your future time, if Fahad can facilitate that. I was reading your brief autobiography in the name, and I was wondering regarding your involvement in developing organizations, involving different disciplines, and the kind of experience you had in bringing together different disciplines. That's one important area I thought is something that we can learn from. And the second is something I wish you deal with sometime later, is this, because you're into industrial organization and the semiconductor industry, the way it is evolving. And a big question is, I mean, does it pay to use the non-market instrument to segment markets, to increase market share? I'm putting it bluntly, but the things that are happening, it would be good to hear you, what you think about it, but not here. I have few quick observations and questions. I'm still confused about this market economy, and then into capitalism. Would it be more appropriate, this is a thought, to think about market and non-market and to find the right balance between market and non-market? That would be socially optimal, whatever way you define your objective function. Rather than just pushing singularly, weak market and then getting into all the kind of questions which are largely, rooted in the way economics is taught. That's one broad question I'm raising. The second relates to, the issues and methods. Morality, I think, am I right to assume that morality is equal to zero negative externality? Is a question. Because it seems to me I am moral only if my behavior doesn't, when you're talking about the repugnant economy, that's the kind of impression I got. With regards to issues and methods, I mean, since you dealt with, the whole issue of capitalism and the ideological space, I was wondering whether, with regards to methods, you really cannot differentiate. It's only with the kind of questions you raise for research, which differentiates people in the ideological space. I mean, what would be your observation on that kind of statement? And finally, it seems that by construct, consumers are to be blamed. This is when you get into this, the last point you make with regards to the three types of consumers. Are you suggesting that consumers are to be blamed for competition being bad? Not the greed or the kind of things that go around with regards to the supply side or with regards to the way market is regulated or not regulated. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your questions, and they are very interesting, but there are many questions at the same time. So let me say a few words, because I would like also to listen to the students. On working across disciplines, so that's something my colleagues and I have been doing for a while. And there are challenges. I mean, there's no question there are challenges to work across fields. One challenge is very simple, it's language. I discovered repeatedly that say what psychologists would call X, I would call Y, and it's like I need a dictionary somehow sometimes, across fields, and but that you learn. I mean, that's okay. But it's a bit of an investment, and methodology is more important because, of course, the methodology is different often. So we have to tolerate. Each of us has to tolerate methodology of the other because we're not used to it, or we may not completely fully approve of it. I could give you examples as well. So that's another difficulty. And then you need a dialogue. By the way you promote multidisciplinary research is not top-down. I think it's much more bottom-up. So what you can do is to encourage the teams who do interdisciplinary work and have already emerged, and then you encourage them by helping them form a department or giving them grants or something like that. I think it's better than having top-down, because top-down, there is a lot of whatever washing it, but basically what I've observed many times in France is that people in different fields get together to get a grant, and then they never see each other when they get a grant. You get a fair amount of that behavior, and that's terrible. So people talk about multidisciplinary research much more than they do it, and that's a bit dangerous. The final point I want to make from my own experience in the field is that we have been thinking about it quite a lot when we started the Institute for Advanced Study in Toulouse. What kind of careers can we promise? And you know, the problem is that if you are in the multiple fields, you fall beyond, within the cracks. So people will say, "Oh, this is not an economist. Oh, it's not a psychologist. It's not a philosopher either." So nobody wants to take the person, and that makes it much more difficult to have a career. So the way we do it in the end is to say, okay, you are a psychologist, you publish in psychology journals, and you get basically the referencing and all those things by the psychologists because you are part of that community. However, what we request, if you want to work at an institute, is a lot of interaction with people from outside your field, and that's what we do. But we have decided that we might actually hurt their career a bit if we, for example, if I work with a psychologist and that is going to be published only in economics, I think that would be terrible for the career of that person. So, we have to be quite careful about that. So, let me see. Oh, I was not very clear about is morality a zero externality? No, it's actually when you compare the cost to you to the benefit for the other. I will say, it's actually a common theme that there are cases where people are too pro-social. So, if I call you every day saying, good morning, and, or if I wish happy birthday on Facebook to 1,000 people, I don't even know them, that's over-signaling somehow, because the benefit for the person is not very big. And so that's the kind of, you may have seen science fiction movies, actually, Broken Mirror, that one where people smile all day long. You have seen those movies, they smile all day long because they get points, and then they have to smile all day long, and they are more, they are over polite and all those things, and the society is totally dystopic society. You may have seen that. That's a case where people actually over signal and actually. So you have to compare the benefit. If I have to sacrifice 10 to give you 1, nobody will think I have to, from a moral point of view, to do it, right? So it's a trade-off between what I sacrifice and what you gain, in a sense. So that's not the point of view of economists, but you might entertain another point of view. After all, it's a moral issue, and we can have different views on that. I don't think the basics of the series will change very much, but I'm not going to answer all your questions. On the ideological space, I mean, I wrote about it in Economics for the Common Good because this is something which I often get the question in France and in Europe. Where do you stand? So you must be a leftist, no? Or you must be a right-wing person, you like the market, so you must be a right-wing person. I said, I just don't care. I mean, as a citizen, I do care. I have my own identity as a citizen, but in the end, I'm a scientist, or I try to be a scientist, and I'm going to try to see where my research takes me. And sometimes it takes me in a direction I didn't expect it. And I think it's my duty to convey what research says with its limits. As a citizen, of course, I have my values and my politics, but as an intellectual, I think my role is not to be an ideologue and just. I think they are dangerous to be in ideology because, I explain to it. Now, some people actually are public intellectuals, and in France, it's actually a very strong tradition. And sometimes it has been bad, actually. The top intellectuals in France have often supported very dictatorial regimes who were bad for freedom, bad for the economy, bad for the environment, bad for everything. And they were still supported by top public intellectuals. And that's, I think, something we have to avoid. Now, I'm not saying that an academic should not go into politics. Some people do that well. I'm saying, there are benefits not to do it. And part of the reason is actually that even if your ideology doesn't keeps you honest, so you keep honest and you say, it is what my science says, independently of my ideology, still people will be suspicious. They will say, oh, you say that because you're a left-wing person or you're a right-wing person. And then your science is almost useless because you are discredited by your own ideology. Even the people who are very honest. And that's a bit dangerous. That's my own view. Lots of people disagree with that view. So, and I would not expect you necessarily to agree with the view, but that's my own view. And people are different, so we can have different approaches to that, and it's fine with me.
Thank you. I know it's 6 p.m. now, and but we'll go to the last round, and I will take these questions in cluster. So I saw a hand from a student, and then this. Okay, can we take these questions in cluster?
Sure, we can take it.
Yeah. So yes, first you, and if you can, one question, please. Okay, for now.
Dear Professor, first of all, it is a big honor to actually have you in my university. When I learned that you are coming as a keynote speaker in this convocation, I couldn't hold my excitement to actually see you in person. So it's a big deal. And I was a student of international business, and my area of interest is regional integration. So on that note, I'll be asking a very one simple question. As Bangladesh will going to be one of the big emerging markets very soon, if the trend is kept the way it is. So about your dictator's theory of the game theory in perspective, like how can you be generous if you don't have the power? Like we have to make generous choices to make difficult choices for ourselves for competing with other developed markets. Like how can we do not do any harm if we cannot go to that particular set of economic power by using fuels which are actually not so eco-friendly, but competing in the industry. We need for sustainable energy resources. For the time being, we need an industrial developed country, which is compromising the environment, but not so ethical in that perspective. So how the countries which are emerging can compete without not breaking the ethical barriers. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. The next one, if I saw the hand there. Yes, please.
Thank you so much, Professor Tirole. It's been a privilege hearing from you. My question is based on your presentation, and if I understand correctly, what you're saying is that for responsible consumers, being ethical increases demand, more competition increases demand, and for irresponsible consumers, being unethical and less competition increases demand. So it's in the best interest for an individual or a consumer to act according to his or her own best interests for the market. Is that correct? If that is so, then my question is, for a society who's trying to promote more responsible consumer behavior, so we're trying to make sure that an irresponsible consumer is behaving more responsibly in future, how would we reconcile that and also ensure the best outcomes for the market? Thank you.
Thank you. I saw a hand there. Yes, please. Yeah. Go on. You can use this microphone.
Actually, at first, I like to inform Mr. Jane Carroll that I am just a teenager of a small village. So consider my question like a child's question.
Okay, go on, please.
Due to the problem of Russia in Ukraine, we are recognizing that there are some problems in our economy, like price hike or some. I need a translator, please. Price hike. Yes, energy crisis. এখন দেখা যাচ্ছে যে যখন এই প্রাইস হাইকটা হচ্ছে তখন আপনি যে মার্কেটিং এর কথা বললেন, আর বাংলাদেশে যদি এরকম হয় আমাদের রিজাল্ট নিচে নেমে যাচ্ছে এবং তাতে দুর্ভিক্ষ দেখা দেওয়ার বাংলাদেশের একটা সম্ভাবনা আছে। এবং দেখা যাচ্ছে যে আপনি যখন বলছেন যে এই মার্কেটিং এর ব্যবস্থাটা, তখন কিভাবে আমরা এই মার্কেটিং করতে পারি যখন যুদ্ধের ইয়া হচ্ছে, কারণ যুদ্ধে তো কোনো কিছু স্টেবল থাকতেছে না।
So what was your question?
আমার কোশ্চেন হচ্ছে এই অবস্থায় বাংলাদেশের করণীয় কি, যখন এইরকম একটা অবস্থা হচ্ছে, যখন ডলার রিজার্ভের নিচে নেমে যাচ্ছে অথবা নিচে একটা সম্ভাবনা হচ্ছে।
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think I'll just come here, yes, Taki, and then two others, please.
So first of all, it's a great honor to be here. It is
There is a microphone.
Thank you, sir. I think it's working. First of all, it's an honor to be here. Sir, my name is Taki. I'm a master's student here at the Department of Economics, University of Dhaka. Unlike the country, obviously I'll be taking the graduation tomorrow. So sir, actually I have two questions. So first of all, you have done great work in terms of the two-sided market. So there you have explained about how the markets in I, or for instance the people, they are charged as low as possible. For instance, we are using Apple, Google, or for instance Meta's Facebook. So we are paying zero price so that they are reducing the cost of getting us on the platform. And at the same time, they are charging high prices from the advertisers. So is there a part where big techs can have a moral responsibility? Can they be held for having a moral responsibility? And in that case, should people be paid to be using this and for being used as a through their platform? So that is one question.
Okay, one question. Sorry, because I have to give the floor to other two things. So yes, the next one. Please.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I'm Shahran Hussain from Dhaka University. My question is a bit connected to the question about global conflicts. Is there any space of morality in the global conflicts we are seeing? Because we are seeing large multinational companies putting a lobby in developing countries. The LNG lobby in Bangladesh is preventing from using the green energy, for example. So is there any space of morality in the global conflicts?
Thank you, and I think this is the last one from Spencer. Yes, of course. We should be first you.
Good evening, Professor. My question is about the increasing housing prices that we are witnessing worldwide. So we see these landowners and homeowners, who are usually large corporations or big businesses, who are charging excessively high prices or rents for their homes. But at the end of the day, they are private owners who are just simply charging for their products. But this is also causing eviction, gentrification, and other such problems which have social costs. So are businesses being ethical here because they're simply charging for their products? And are people who are protesting against this because they are being evicted from a place they've been living in for generations, but they don't technically or legally own the place? So who is being moral here? And in the housing sector, can we have markets who are moral? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, yes.
Thank you very much, sir. Sir, I'm a student of 4th year of the University of Dhaka. So, sir, I have a question which is a bit related to morality. That is, sir, is there a limit to which a person should be allowed to hoard wealth? Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. I think I can see, is there any other student, please? If not, then I'll have the final question from Dr. Vidisha, and then I think we are already closer to 2 minutes past 6.
Okay, I'm Sana Haq. I teach economics at Dhaka University. So very silly and small question, in fact. I was wondering, like when you were talking about in the lecture about being a responsible consumer. So it seems like if you're a responsible consumer, it's good for having competition and having a moral. So, but how we can contextualize it in the context of developing countries like Bangladesh? So, is it a thing that we need to have a threshold amount of income to have responsible consumers, or otherwise, morality is sometimes like responsibility is sometimes related to the affordability as well. So, I can maybe afford to be a responsible consumer, but I cannot expect it from a rickshaw puller. So, and in that case, if this happens, then at the end of the day, will it lead or will it provide disincentive for honest or moral industrialist and the entrepreneur to go out of the market? So will it create a market for lemon problem, or is it a vicious circle problem? So that is something I want to know about you.
Many questions.
Well, thanks so much. Those were great questions. And I mean, I'm willing to stay late if you want, but yeah, it's actually very interesting. So the carbon price is really a big issue for Bangladesh. Of course, you like to have a carbon price in the rest of the world so that countries get their act together and actually try to do something about their pollution. You know, we get carbon prices around the world, often in the form of cap and trade. There are almost 50 now cap and trade exchanges from California to China. The one which is most advanced by far is the European one. We have at a price of close to $100 per ton, which is about the price which is computed by the IPCC for reducing, trying to stick to the COP21 agreements. Also, there are also some bad news about Europe, but at least Europe has tried. Sweden has tried to get $100 per ton for 30 years now, but in most countries the price of carbon is $5, which is ridiculously small, and of course doesn't induce the changes that it should be inducing. So there is no question that you as Bangladesh will benefit from the world finally getting a carbon price. Now, the question was not that one. The question was, what will happen to Bangladesh if it imposes a carbon price, but the competing countries who are not imposing a carbon price? And that's a difficult issue. And that's a free riding issue, which is that the countries would like the other countries to make efforts, and that's how we end up, but not themselves, so that's how we end up with a disaster. So yes, you should be lobbying for a carbon price, because if other countries have a carbon price, then you can have a carbon price and you are not suffering a competitive disadvantage. If that's not the case, what do you do? So in Europe, what's going to be done is a carbon tax adjustment at the border. So basically, imported goods coming to Europe will be paying this carbon tax adjustment. And the idea is that if we want to have a high carbon price in Europe, we need to also to make sure that the jobs don't go elsewhere, where there has been no carbon price. And that's actually a very important issue. That's my first part. What we fail to do is to have an international agreement so there is a level playing field. Everybody has the same carbon price. Because I don't see a way to solve. There are only two ways, and probably we need the two in order to solve what's going to happen. One is to give correct incentives, proper incentives for the firms and the individuals and the administration to reduce their pollution. And then a lot more green R&D than we have now. We need both. I mean, it's getting very late. If we don't have that, it's going to be a disaster. Now, the second point, which of course is in your brain, I'm sure, is that we in the West have grown by polluting, and you haven't, and you want to grow, which is perfectly legitimate. But my view is that it doesn't mean you should not have a carbon price. And the other emerging countries will not have a carbon price, because that would be the wrong policy. Because most of the pollution are going to come from emerging countries. And just look at how much coal China is using every day. It's almost 50% of pollution. Look at what many other countries are doing in terms of polluting. Now, sure, the US and Europe are doing it, especially the US more than Europe. And Europeans are a bit biased. But yeah, still, We are polluting too much, fine. But you know, in the end, what's going to? I mean, I see Europe. It's 9% of the pollution. You know, in 20 years, I don't know, it might be 4% or something. You know, we can put all the effort we want. You know, it's not going to solve the issue. We have to do it, of course, but if the emerging countries also don't eliminate their coal plants, well, that's fair. I know you have gotten rid of 10 in Bangladesh, but you know, if we don't get rid of coal, I don't know if India and China and many other countries don't really get rid of their coal. I don't know what's going to happen. You know, at some point, if you want to save the planet and save Bangladesh for that matter, you know, you need to have a carbon price. But then it's unfair to the emerging countries too, because it's going to slow down their development. So that's why they need to be transfers as well. So I'm saying the starting point is the right one. You feel some sense of unfairness, but at the same time, don't conclude you need no carbon price. Okay, that's different statement. So there was a question on society's role and what is responsible and irresponsible. No, what we're doing with Medias de Retribo is to say, there are people who feel strongly about the environment, and they might be socially responsible consumer or investor. There are other people who just want money, and they're going to be corrupt and going to ask for money, or they will be dictators. So we take that as exogenous. The question is, how do markets interfere with that fact? That's what we do. Of course, society can change our social responsibility by reminding us of what the social responsibility. And I come back to moral wiggle room here. Is that we often, it's too easy to forget what the responsibility is, right? We know, in a sense, we know we have to do some effort, but as individuals, we have also a tendency to forget. And where society can play a role is to remind people of their social duty. You know, it's something that is done in all kinds of moralities, of religions, or politics, or whatever. You know, reminding of what the moral duty is always important. There were several questions about Ukraine and Russia. I mean, I must say I'm appalled by what happened earlier this year. It's absolutely terrible. It's always the case, by the way, that being belligerent, warmongering is always serving the rulers and the presidents and the like, and not the people. And we see another illustration of that. It's another big externality for sure. But that has consequences. The energy price, certain energy price, I mean more like gas in Europe, because most of the Russian gas is exported in Europe, and they don't have substitute. We don't have substitute either in Europe, so that's difficult too for us. But oil is a different thing, because oil is more of a world good. So, and you have seen Russia cannot sell oil to Europe or to the US. Well, they didn't sell much to the US anyway, but they sell it to India, they sell it to Iran, they sell it to, it's easy. I mean, they sell it at a discount, but it's more a world thing. So, if you think about why the price of oil is high today, I would say it's not so much the Ukraine-Russia war. It's other things. The first is that OPEC is has been very successful at raising prices, or cartels have done their job. Second element is that there's still a huge amount of subsidies for fossil fuel. So that's where Europe is less clean, I would say. We see in Europe that many countries in Europe, including my own, have said, don't worry, the price is going to remain constant. Even so, the price has gone up a huge amount in the world market. So there is huge amount of subsidy for fossil fuel. Actually, the biggest subsidizers of fossil fuel energies traditionally are the US, Russia, China, those countries, India maybe, and many others. Europe less so. I mean, we subsidize fossil fuel, but too much. But now, with this tariff shield, we're really actually subsidizing fossil fuels quite a lot. So that's unfortunate. That's another reason. Now, why is the price of oil so high? There is a third reason. I mentioned OPEC. I mentioned the tariff shields everywhere in the world, which means that there is no elasticity of demand. If you keep the price fixed, that means your consumer and firms don't react to it, and they should be reacting to it. So the elasticity of demand has gone, which of course allows OPEC to raise price. It's as simple as that. And the third thing, which explains that, is that the major oil producers actually haven't invested that much, which is good in per se, but not good for the short term, because they see actually that producing oil is becoming more and more unpopular. And they see also that at some point there will be a backlash and there will be finally a regulation against carbon emitters. And therefore they have less incentive now to invest in capacity which should be used in 10 years or 15 years still. So that they are preparing themselves in a sense, in part. They're still exploiting fully their oil production, but they are not digging new wells and the like. So it's a series of things, and I'm not sure that it's a Ukraine-Russian war which is really explaining the price of oil. It's explaining the price of gas in Europe for sure, but that's different ballgame. There was a question on two-sided markets. I'm not sure there's. I'm a very strong proponent of regulating the GAFAs in a tighter way, but they have a business model. So, there's a lot of discussion about whether we should get all those services for free, which we do. We get those wonderful services for free, but of course we are paying on the other side. The advertisers pay a lot, the merchants pay a lot, and that means that we actually are paying indirectly because that raises the cost of doing business. So from that point of view, I don't think there's a big moral issue in that area. We have business model, including by non-dominant firms, which using exactly this business model. So it has been a dominant way of thinking about whether people should be paid for their data. Maybe not. I don't know. I haven't seen any convincing. Actually, one of my friends has worked on that a bit, Glenn Weil. But it's difficult because to make it operational is not an easy thing, and I haven't seen any good plan. But maybe you'll be working on it and finding a good plan. There was a question on the housing market. My view on the housing market would be a more liberal point of view. I share entirely your concerns. By the way, it's more specific to a country like Bangladesh because in other countries you have property rights, and that's a bit different. But it's true. I mean, you see in many countries, including the rich countries, that the city centers, people cannot afford it anymore. You cannot afford living in Paris, in London, or in New York if you are a worker or even a middle-class person. It's not affordable. But I think it has to do with the politics. So I'm not going to answer the case of Bangladesh because I'm totally incompetent. But in France or in many other countries, they have chosen basically not to build in a city center. Now, if it's a city center of Paris, you understand you don't want. But there are neighborhoods where you could build in a city center, including high rises. If you do it well, that could be interesting because what has happened is that the inhabitants of city centers, including in Toulouse, by the way, in everything. I live in the center of Toulouse, so I'm one of the happy people who walk to work, and it's wonderful. And the mayor, like all mayors, right wing, left wing in France, they try to keep the people who live in suburb away from the city center, so that it's impossible to park. It's more and more streets are pedestrian. I love it. I love it because and on top of that, I own my apartment, so the price of my apartment goes up. I mean, this is wonderful. Except that people, Toulouse is one of the most spread out cities in Europe, with Stockholm and Berlin. It's one of the, so suburbs are sprawling, which is bad for the environment. Actually, people live 60, 70 kilometers away from Toulouse and they drive. This is not reasonable. And you get this kind of situation where the housing in the city center has become incredibly expensive, and then the others are, they move far away and there are huge traffic jams and things like that. It's not sustainable, I would say. And there, I think one of the issues is actually how to densify, to make it, have denser cities, so that, but which are still livable. That's the big caveat. A month ago, I was in Chicago, which is one of my favorite cities, except for the weather. And that's a city which has been totally erased by an earthquake around 1870, and it has been erased, and it has basically been reconstructed with the help of very good architects. I mean, when you walk through the street of Chicago along the Chicago River, it's absolutely beautiful. I mean, I'm talking to the expert here. Antonio, of course, knows Chicago 10 times better than I do, but it's a beautiful city, and it's affordable. I mean, with U.S. income, it's affordable. It's not my type of city, but it's absolutely beautiful and very livable. The city center I'm talking about. And the thing is that they've used good architects and made a city which is very beautiful in that way. And that's one possibility. But I think we could do more in many cities. But of course, the mayors of cities are protecting their inhabitants' rights. And so they are trying to kick out everybody else, and that's makes the things difficult, because we need public transportation. We have to stop with this car business. We need public transportation, but you cannot do public transportation if the city is sprawling like this. It's impossible. So that's something that we have to improve. Make cities. I'm not an urban planner. I have very little, even in urban economics, I have very little knowledge. But it seems to me that this is one area where actually the state should be stronger too. So less capture by lobbies. Let's put it like this. Limit to how much money a person can. How much money a person can make? I will say no. I mean, you might be surprised, but I might say no. Of course, what you make with tens of billions of dollars. I mean, for me, it's hard to imagine, but I for theory for a number of years, it just makes no sense, because when you start as an entrepreneur, you want to succeed. And that's perfectly usable, but you will never. You will do the same thing if you were promised much lower rewards anyway. But capping the reward has two primes. The first is just a political economy thing, which is that people can move abroad. Rich people can easily move abroad, and that's an issue. So you need an international agreement to make sure that doesn't happen. It's very hard, and it hasn't been done. And look at school. There's some good news with this corporation, the 15% tax. It's a start. People say, it's not enough. No, I would say, look, it's better than zero. And it's new. It's just like let's start from there. And you can tax them. if people make more money, that's good. Because if you can tax them and finance public goods, education and health and all those things. So I will be in favor of much more redistribution, but I will not put a cap. Because it's not optimal, I think, in terms of responsible consumers. Yeah, I mean, in the case of Bangladesh, I think being green and so on doesn't have to be that sometimes is what we call a normal good. I mean, it's clear it's easier to be green when you have plenty of money, right? That's kind of obvious, and it's harder when you starve, of course. I fully understand that. But given, coming back to the environment, the best is we'll have a strong world governance on sustainability and so on. But since we don't have that, what remains is social responsibility. And it's not as good, but we can do stuff. And that's something we can develop. And the fact that there are big corporations, big investors who say, I'm not going to source from a country which doesn't respect labor, workers' rights, which pollutes the environment and so on, is actually a good thing. It's a good thing, including for Bangladesh, as long as it's applied to all other countries which are competing with Bangladesh. But those rules are they apply across countries. So the important thing for Bangladesh is that you have the level playing field. So if you treat well your workers and you treat well the environment, your cost is not going to be so high that actually you're going to lose all your market. And my view on that is that if you have this strong corporate social responsibility movement, ESG movement, you can do something, and that's going to apply across countries. And if it applies across countries, sure, your costs are going to be higher, but the cost of other countries is going to be higher as well. And that's fine. That's fine. But that relies, of course, on people in the West being responsible, socially responsible. And I hope it's going to be the case.
Thank you very much. I think we should not now allow any further question. But let me request Professor Hemant Sofan if he can share his views and share a few words with us. Please.
I think it's a bit unfair to bring me in since you've been here for 2.5 hours. That's way above union's commitment time for teachers. Actually, I will just pose some very brief issues. I noticed that whether for lack of time or design, you never actually answered the question you posed at the outset of your lecture. So we have still been left with some uncertainty as to whether at a conceptual level you are willing to ascribe issues of morality to the market. My own understanding of the market is it's actually an abstraction. And one of the consequences of the way in which I think we proceeded in the question hour arose from the fact that people were not applying their mind to the abstract question you posed, but was really raising questions about the morality of outcomes derived again from, you may say, the morality or lack of it of the way in which human beings, institutions, and governments actually function. So most of the discussions went around that line of questioning. All the issues about environment, the issues about global markets. We're talking about the immorality of the way in which global markets may be functioning. does not address the issue of the question of whether markets as an abstract idea taught by you as a teacher are moral or not moral. So I think the way I would leave it over here is that we can go on having extended discussions about the morality or human behavior, which is really the relevant determinant of how markets as instrument are actually used, and the way in which governments both govern and regulate the market are key determinants again of how markets function. The way in which the business sector, workers react to the impact of the market. I mean, all we do know is that the essence of functioning markets is that they operate basically on highly unequal terms depending on how people participate in the market. And this is really determined by their respective competitive strengths. So that if there is issue of morality in markets, it's the fact that it cannot effectively deal with the inequitable participation of people and institutions in those markets. And I think this is what comes out in both the discussion and a great deal of the literature.
Thank you so much for your comment, and I could not agree more that we should look at outcomes when we think about the morality of markets. So my main message was really that in order to think about the morality of markets, of the outcome, you'll have to look at the specific circumstances, so that cases where it's going to improve more outcomes, and cases where it's going to reduce more outcomes, and cases where it's not going to have any impact. We need more empirical work, by the way. There is I didn't mention it, but there's a little bit of empirical work trying to find out how it works in practice. If those theories have any sense, make any sense. So that's something we need to know more. But something I haven't mentioned, which is very important, is the counterfactual. So if you don't allocate goods and services to a market, you're going to allocate in a different way. But the question is, in a sense, the relevant question is, are those different ways more or less moral than the one we have with the market economy? Broadly, my question is, the outcome may be immoral, but it's not because you have more competition that's going to make less moral. So that's really my line. But the counterfactual is, what is the counterfactual, right? Is that the important thing? And that's something I didn't discuss. It's too easy to say, okay, but if you look at the counterfactual as being the Soviet Union, see what has happened in the Soviet Union. Did you get equality? No. Did you get good environment? No, it was terrible. Did you get freedom? No. And you can go on, and the outcome of you get political competition, whatever. The outcome was terrible, even so it was the market economy. But that's too easy in a sense. I'm taking the poster child of a dictatorship, and but somehow you need a way of saying. So you might say, some different way of allocating good is using NGOs, for example. That's another counterfactual. But even that one is not simple, because NGOs have, especially in these countries, have been quite good, have been very good, but they are not always good. And the worst thing is that the more money they have, the more people think of NGOs as being a way of making a career or making money. And so those institutions which attracted very, very good people, very generous people, the more money they get and the more power they have, then the more they're going to attract people who actually do it for the career and the money and the ambition. And so those things are not easy, and I fully agree with you that we economists, we have to think harder about different ways of organizing society. And what I talk about today was only a very small way, a very small part of the puzzle. But we need to consider various ways, because in the end, incentives matter, and that's something I think is very important. Incentives matter, And not only monetary incentives, all kinds of image incentives. We have worked a lot on matter a lot, and we have to do more work. I think that would be a good conclusion for the students here, actually.
Thank you very much, Professor Tirole. I think we had an excellent session today, and we can go on and on, of course, with the questions. We'll have some opportunities. We'll have a very brief tea session with the Bureau of Economic Research. We have a conference room with the faculties, but for the students, we'll have a refreshment here. So, before I conclude, I just want to request Dr. Fahad Khalil to say a few words, because without his help and initiative, we would not be able to have this session today with Professor Tirole. Over to you. Yes.
I guess I'm mainly speaking to the students. Maybe I should face them if I'm speaking to the students. So many of you have started what you wanted to say by saying how awestruck you are or how inspired you are by Jean's presence here. And I can assure you, none of you feel that, experience that feeling more than I do. When I was a student here, every time I come here and speak, it's a special occasion for me. And today is, it's hard to imagine I'm in the same room as when I was a student and I went to the US, I had a sense that incentives were important. That in the many of the discussions that we were having in class and outside, there was something that was never satisfying to me, and it was the absence of incentives. I don't think I realized it as well as I do now, but I think I had that sense. I go to the US, first year of my PhD program. His colleague Jacques Cremer, who was my mentor, he teaches a class, and I see an incentive compatibility constraint, first year of, changed my life. This was it. I saw a constraint that gave structure to something that I wanted to, I was seeking. And I saw it right away, and it completely changed my life. So Jean has been very kind to me personally over the years, but I wanted to sort of give you a sense of my intellectual gratitude to Jean and his colleagues. They created this field of incentives, major contributions. They gave structure to a way of thinking that allowed people like me to work and go to topics, go to places that we would not have been able to go otherwise. So when you see the kind of work he does, for example, today's talk, and you say, why isn't this more common? Why aren't more people doing similar work? Because it's extremely hard. Why is it hard? Because we all know the conclusions. So we assume the conclusions. So the distance between assumptions and conclusions, the analysis teaching you something, to keep a scope for surprise. While you make assumptions, there has to be a scope for surprise before you reach conclusion. That is extremely hard, especially in topics in which we all think we know. This is something very close to our heart. We've thought about it, we've discussed it, we've had tea over it, and we can lecture on it, and yet we cannot think carefully about it. These are very, very hard things. So when somebody like Jean puts structure to these thoughts, look at the model, see how they have made use of assumptions of morality. How does that feature in a mathematical structure? See where you can take it. Because then you can start thinking. So Jean's longtime co-author, Jean-Jacques Lafont, he said a beautiful line one time, long time ago. He said, you take a concept like asymmetric information, and then turn that into a first order condition. You have made progress. Because then I can also think about asymmetric information. So my debt is, I mean, I cannot ever say in words what this means. So thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, partner. I think we really needed you at the end to finish with a very nice touch. And thank you so much, and thank you everyone, especially of course Professor Tirole. We thought of having a 2-hour session. Now it's almost a 3-hour session. So I think we had an excellent experience, and we'll remember this session. So we thank and we conclude this session today. But I can give the students an offer. You can actually have a photograph with Professor Tirole. So what we'll do, we faculties will go out, and then Professor Tirole will stay here, sit here, and you come over here. Have a photograph with you.
I want separately.